Thank you very much for introducing me, and good morning, and everyone. I hope you enjoy today's my lecture. Today I'm going to talk about animated persona. Okay, this is a menu of today's talk. First, I will talk about some philosophers' discussion on life and death in Japanese philosophers, and then I talk about Viktor Frankl, and I'm going to compare the similarities and differences between Frankl and Japanese philosophers on the issues of life and death. And lastly, I am going to make a philosophical analysis of the concept of animated persona. And this is my self-introduction, and I'm now teaching philosophy and ethics at Waseda University, and okay. And my background was I studied first physics and then moved to philosophy of Wittgenstein, and then I got my PhD in bioethics. And these are the list of my Japanese books, which include bioethics and criticism of contemporary civilization, and gender and sexuality issues, and philosophical essays. And now I'm writing some books on hard philosophy in Japanese. And I will try to translate in English in the future. And also, I drew manga pictures for this conference. This is a manga picture for 2017, which was held in Paris. Okay, and this is my hobby. Okay, let's move on to the general introduction of my presentation. And today's presentation is an enlarged and detailed version of my former talk at the second conference of ENOJP 2016 under the title The Concept of Persona in Watsuji and Its Importance in Contemporary Bioethics. And there are overlapping contents between them, particularly on Watsuji and journalist Yanagita, but today's talk is the newest and fully revised one, and some texts are placed in a different context. So please forgive me using the same text in some places. Okay. In Japan, after the Great East Japan earthquake in 2011, many tsunami victims who have lost their family members are reported to have encountered their beloved ones in their homes, the seashores, and other local places. And some saw their images in the living rooms, and some heard their voices in the breezing wind. From the perspective of modern science, these phenomena are interpreted as a kind of illusion caused by the victims' overwhelming emotions toward their lost family members. I would like to present a new philosophical framework that enables us to see these phenomena, which ordinary people experience in their everyday settings, in a different way, interpret them in a different way. The theme of my presentation is the encounter between the living and the dead that appeared in Japanese non-fictions and philosophical texts. First, I'd like to introduce you some sentences from Yanagita Kunio. It is interesting that even a person who does not believe in the existence of souls can have this kind of experience. For example, journalist Yanagita Kunio, a well-known Japanese journalist with a clear scientific mindset, confesses his experiences of having conversations with his brain-dead, unconscious son in the hospital. And he lost his second son by way of brain death. In the hospital, he touches the warm hands of his son and calls his name Yojiro. He talks to his brain-dead son on the bedside about his memories of the past experiences father and son, they shared. And Yanagita says, my son's body converses with me without spoken language. This is a mysterious feeling. And this is quote from his book. When Kenichiro and I talked to Yojiro, though he was brain dead, his body talked back to us. This was truly a mysterious experience. This was probably a sense that can be understood only by members of a family who have shared happiness and sorrows with each other. Despite the scientific explanation that a brain-dead person is literally a dead person who has no consciousness or senses, I became quite sure that the beloved one's brain-dead body means a lot to the family members who have shared a spiritual life with each other. And this was a very strange experience for him because he strongly felt as if there were some living person in front of him, although his son was in the state of brain death, lying on the bed without self-consciousness. As a journalist, Yanagita clearly understood the fact that the brain-dead patient had lost self-consciousness permanently. But as a father, he couldn't help noticing a fragment of personhood on his beloved son's brain-dead body. We can find similar narratives in the memoirs of a number of families of brain-dead patients. Yes, we have a number of such texts in Japanese. And reading those texts, what was most impressive to me was the fact that they believed there occurred a dialogue or conversation without spoken language between the brain-dead person and family members. They believed they were able to have a dialogue with something which appeared on the body of their beloved one in front of them in the hospital. We can find similar ideas in some other philosophical and non-fictional Japanese texts. Okay, let's move on to the Tanabe Hajime. Tanabe Hajime writes in his article, 生の存在学か死の弁証法か that living persons can communicate with deceased persons and can create an existential cooperation, 実存共同, with them. And Tanabe argues that the love of a deceased person toward a living person and the love of the living person toward the deceased person resonate with each other as a mutual existential cooperation of love, which creates the death revival, 死復活. And Tanabe calls this the cooperative sympathy through mutual love between the living and the deceased. 死者生者の交互愛における共同感能. The uniqueness of Tanabe's thought is that he believes that the living and the deceased can actually communicate with each other in this world. This reminds me of the conversation between a brain-dead patient and her family members. He argues that in a cooperative sympathy, firstly, there is a catharsis of the deceased, and secondly, the living is purified by the deceased catharsis, and thirdly, the living and the deceased are mutually sacralized. He argues that first of all, there is the catharsis of the deceased, and then secondly, there occurs the purification of the living, influenced by the deceased. This suggests that in the existential cooperation, the starting point of the cooperation is the deceased, not the living. This is a very interesting point. His discussion is made at the level of philosophy of religion. Hence, it cannot be directly applied to Yanagita's case. However, it is also true that Yanagita and Tanabe share an important perspective on the relationship between the living and the deceased. And then we move on to the Uehara Senroku. Tanabe's concept of existential cooperation resonates in the Uehara Senroku's discussion on the living and the deceased in his book Seija Shisha. Uehara was a historian. He specialized in European history at Hitotsubashi University. His religious background was Nichirenshu. And Uehara writes that he actually feels the permanent existence, jōzai, of his late wife when he sits in front of her Buddhist memorial tablet. This is the existence that is not dead in spite of having already died. This is his words, his expression. Then Uehara comes to think that he actually exists with his late wife, lives with her, and fights with social injustice with her. He calls this the coexistence, the co-living and the co-fighting between the deceased and the living. 死者と生者との共存共生共闘。He writes a special chapter in his book to fight with medical misconducts, having done to his wife at hospitals. He says that this chapter was written as the result of co-fighting with his late wife against injustice, and the leading figure was not him, but his late wife. And this shows that the person who judges is the deceased, not the living. And in this process, he sometimes heard his late wife's voice. He said he actually heard her voice. He also believes that it is the function of echo, Buddhist memorial services, that can connect the living and the deceased. It is interesting that he also thinks that in the process of the communication between the living and the dead, the starting point or the leading figure is the deceased, not the living. And next, let us look at Wakamatsu Eisuke's text. Wakamatsu Eisuke, he is a critic, also talks about the existence of his late wife and call her ontological status the deceased alive, ikeru shisha. He writes, the deceased is not a vivid picture that remains in the memory of the living, but the deceased alive, the being that exists beyond the world of our five senses. Okay, what this? He further states, the deceased are our accompanying persons. They actually feel pain, grief, feel sorrow, and rejoice with us. For Wakamatsu, the deceased has its own inner emotions. The deceased always exists beside the living and has to look at the face of the living who cries over the deceased. The deceased also feels the living in the midst of her sorrow. The sorrow means a cooperative conduct appearing between the living and the deceased. So Wakamatsu insists that the deceased herself actually has her own inner emotions. So he argues that the deceased actually feels, cries, and have such various emotions. I do not really fully understand or fully sympathize with his idea, but anyway, this is a very interesting argument, I think. Okay, let's go on to Watsuji's concept of persona. And in his essay, Mask and Persona, published in 1935, Watsuji Tetsuro talks about the Japanese no play and its relationship with the concept of persona. Persona is a Latin word that originally meant a mask. In a no play, a player sets a special mask on his face and dances on the stage. Watsuji says a no mask looks like the face of a person who has died suddenly. However, as soon as a no player puts a mask on his face, the mask starts to show various expressions, as if it were the face of a living person. The movement of the no player's body breathes life into the dead mask and lets show various emotions of a living person. So in this sense, the no player's body animates the dead mask. At first, the player's mask is that of a deceased person, but gradually the player's bodily movement begins to give life to it. And finally, in the midst of a beautiful dance, the mask acquires vital sparkles on its surface. A no mask does not have its own self-consciousness or rationality. It is nothing but a mask made of wood. But as soon as the player puts it on his face and starts to move on the stage before an audience, the no mask becomes the locus of personhood and governs the player's body. Watsuji calls this personhood persona. This persona appears on the surface of the no mask on the player's face. This persona is not the player's inner personality. This persona is a mysterious something that has emerged from the whole interactions of the player, other actors, and audience, music, and the story of the play. Watsuji's persona theory, interpreted above, suggests that even a wooden mask, devoid of self-consciousness or rationality, can be a kind of person when it is animated by the bodily movement of a player or something else. I would like to call this type of personhood animated persona. I have been using the word animistic persona until this year, but this year I changed the term from the animistic persona to animated persona. And I'd like to use the animated persona through this my presentation today. This idea clearly contradicts with the modern European concept of person or persona or person, which requires self-consciousness, free will, or rationality as a necessary condition for something's being a person. 2 years later, in 1937, Watsuji published Rinrigaku Volume 1 and systematically discussed the concept of person in Chapter 1 of that book. However, we cannot find the theme of animated persona there. It seems to me that the theme of animated persona was separated from his ethics as a philosophical system, being put outside of it. I don't know the reason why this happened. For me, the concept of animated persona is more attractive than his discussion of person in ethics, especially from the viewpoint of the relationship between the living and the dead. Okay, let's go back to our main discussion. I believe that the mysterious something that appeared on the body of the brain-dead son in Yanagita's case is identical to this animated persona that Watsuji discovered on a no mask. And when various authors talk about the cooperative relationship between the living and the dead, what they mean by the words "the dead" is also, I believe, the animated persona of the dead. Okay, an animated persona appearing on a no mask in the case of Watsuji, an animated persona appearing on the body of a brain-dead patient in the case of Yanagita, and animated persona of the deceased, which the living perceives in her imagination in the cases of Tanabe, Uehara, and Wakamatsu, should not be considered just an illusion or projection. It is something the audience or family members actually perceives. But of course, it is not a soul as entity existing inside the dead body or on the surface of a mask or somewhere in their imagination. We cannot directly see, touch, or hear an animated persona itself, but we can perceive its appearance with our whole body, and we can communicate with it without spoken language. In other words, an animistic persona is a voice without sound that can be heard by people who have had special relationships with a person in a state of brain death, or by the audience who are deeply into the no play performed in front of them. And the message that the voice without sound delivers is, "I am here." This is the essence of the appearance of an animated persona. Okay, let's compare these ideas found in Japanese text with Viktor Frankl's very famous book, Man's Search for Meaning. Interestingly, we can find similar descriptions in Viktor Frankl's masterpiece, Man's Search for Meaning. In the concentration camp, while forced to engage in hard labor, Franco remembers the image of his beloved wife, and who is in another camp, and he does not know whether or not she is alive. And these are quotes from his book. "I resumed talk with my beloved one. I asked her questions, and she answered. She questioned me in return, and I answered. A thought crossed my mind. I didn't even know if she were still alive. I knew only one thing, which I have learned well by now. Love goes very far beyond the physical person of the beloved. It finds its deepest meaning in the beloved person's spiritual being, his inner self. Whether or not the beloved person is actually present, whether or not he is still alive at all, ceases somehow to be of importance. There was no need for me to know. Nothing could touch the strength of my love, my thoughts, and the image of my beloved. Had I known then that my wife was dead, I think that I would still have given myself, undisturbed by that knowledge, to the contemplation for her image, and that my mental conversation with her would have been just as vivid and just as satisfying. Once again, I communed with my beloved. More and more I felt that she was present, that she was with me. I had the feeling that I was able to touch her, able to stretch out my hand and grasp hers. The feeling was very strong. She was there. Sie ist da. Franco's experiences of having conversations with his beloved wife and of having the feeling that she is there are considered to be impressive examples of the appearance of an animated persona in Watsuji and Morioka's sense. Franco also writes about a young woman who is going to die shortly. This young woman knew that she would die in the next few days. Pointing through the window of the hut, she said, "This tree here is the only friend I have in my loneliness. I often talk to this tree," she said to me. Anxiously, I asked her if the tree replied. "Yes," she said. "What did it say to her?" She answered. "It said to me, I am here, I am here, I am life, eternal life." I think that here too, Franco talks about animated persona, the voice without sound, I am here, which this time appears on the tree, on the surface of the tree. Franco is a Jewish thinker, hence it may be misleading. In this context, call the above cases the experience of perceiving an animated persona. However, Franco's cases clearly indicate that humans have been experiencing this sort of phenomena irrespective of time and space, from ancient to modern times. This is a truly universal experience. Okay, so let's go on to the philosophical analysis of this concept. The concept of animated persona has a completely different meaning from the concept of persona in the mainstream European tradition. I believe that animated persona can be defined as the compelling power to make me believe that there is a person there. Let us clarify here the meanings of the words in the above phrase, there is a person, and there, and the compelling power to make me believe, respectively, one by one. Okay, first, what does there is a person mean? Every time I perceive that there is someone, a certain person in front of me, or in a breezing wind at the seashore in the morning, I hear the voice without sound, I am here, there. There is a person can be interpreted as there is the voice without sound, I am here. To perceive a voice without sound is not to hear sound waves uttered by the body in front of me. To perceive it is to hear the message, I am here, emitted from the body in front of me. We can perceive this message without using auditory organs. We can perceive it directly through our whole body. This resembles our religious experiences. We can find a variety of literatures in which people hear the voice of God or gods not through their auditory organs. They hear such voices without sound when they see something or when they feel a certain atmosphere. In this sense, the second example of Franco's text is suggestive. The young woman heard the voice of God without sound when she saw the tree outside the window. this is considered to be a religious experience of encountering God. But this experience is also very similar to our experience of perceiving an animated persona on a branded family member or on a no mask on the stage. And in this sense, we can say that perceiving God or gods and perceiving an animated persona share an important characteristic we have not fully clarified. And this may further suggest that perceiving a person itself might be a religious experience. This may be a strange idea, but recently I feel that every time I feel there is a person in front of me, this might be a religious experience. So the encounter between a person and a person might be every time a religious experience, not an everyday experience, but it has some religious aspects. I don't know. Okay, but anyway, perceiving a person itself might be a religious experience. Then, what is the meaning of I in the words "I am here"? And Morioka, me, thinks that in this case, the word I stands for the subject that appears on the surface of that body, not the subject that exists inside that body. This is closely connected to the next question. Okay, so next question is, what does there mean? An animated persona means the compelling power to make me believe that there is a person there. What is the meaning of there at the end of this sentence? In the case of a brain-dead patient, this there means the surface of the brain-dead patient's body. The voice without sound comes from the surface of the body, not from the inside of the body. The place that emits the voice is the surface, not the inside. And we have to make a Copernican turn here. As modern humans, we are inclined to think that what is hidden inside the surface is the most important essence of an object. But we have to turn our idea. We tend to think that our interior character that usually exists inside us is more important than our exterior looks or behaviors. However, with regard to animated persona, this relation becomes completely opposite. An animated persona appears just on the surface of the object. The surface is the original position of an animated persona. It is impossible for it to exist inside something. Persona is always on the surface of something. For an animated persona, what appears on the surface is everything. There is nothing that is hidden inside. The essence of animated persona is its surfaceness. And it is this surfaceness that constructs the ontological status of animated persona. This is one of the main arguments of my today's presentation. The surfaceness does not mean shallowness. The surfaceness can have deepness. We need to change our framework of thinking about humanity and personhood here. Husserl's concept of the other mind is completely different from our animated persona. This is very clear. So let's imagine Immanuel Levinas's philosophy. And Levinas talks about the face, which is considered to be the trace of the advent of the other, which is destined to escape from my every endeavor to grasp it. Levinas is the other is different from the concept of animated persona, but his concept of the face might have a similar aspect of our animated persona, because the face is something that remains on the surface of one's body. Concerning our experience of animated persona, there is no delay in Levinas's sense. The voice without sound reaches me simultaneously with my experience of an animated persona. Then, where can an animated persona appear? It appears on the surface of something, but it can also appear in the breathing wind, in my memory, and in my imagination. And in the latter three cases, in the breathing wind, in my memory, and in my imagination, animated persona do not have their physical places. This means that there are two kinds of animated persona: those that have their physical places and those that do not have physical places. Okay, then what does the compelling power to make me believe mean? A striking feature of the appearance of an animated persona is that it makes the person who perceives an animated persona react in some way or other. Sitting before his brain-dead son, Yanagita began conversations with him, and Franco, perceiving the appearance of his wife in the sky, began conversations with her. It should be noted that in the beginning there is the appearance of an animated persona, and then next, being triggered by it, the persons who perceived the appearance start to react to the animated persona in the form of conversation. This suggests that an animated persona has a compelling power to make the perceiver react to it in some form, and in many cases, in the form of utterances or conversations. I think that an animated persona is not an entity that has this kind of power, but that an animated persona itself is this kind of power. The reason is that there is no theoretical merit in hypothesizing this entity. The only characteristic of the entity is just to exist in order to explain the compelling power of animated persona. Thus, we can say that an animated persona appears as power in the form of a voice without sound. Okay, so far I have discussed the concept of animated persona as a fragment of personhood of a dead person, which appears on the body of a brain-dead patient, or in the sky, or in the breathing wind. However, interestingly, this concept can also be applied to living human beings and other non-living objects. Imagine the situation in which I enter a classroom and find my friend there. She smiles at me and I say hello to her. In this case, why did I say hello to her? The reason is that there was a person in the classroom. Then why did I think that there was a person there in the classroom? That is because I received the compelling power to make me believe that there was a person there when I saw the figure of my friend in the classroom. In other words, I perceived an animated persona on the surface of the living human body, which I see in the classroom. Please keep in mind that the reason was not that I noticed a human being who had self-consciousness inside the body. That human being I saw in the classroom might actually have been a well-produced robot and might not have self-consciousness at all. Okay, then what about Watsuji's no player case? Okay, then what about Watsuji's no player case? In this case, the audience perceived the appearance of an animistic persona on the surface of the no player's wooden mask. Apparently, the audience do not believe that the wooden mask itself had inner self-consciousness. But nevertheless, at the same time, the audience perceived an animated persona on the same mask. This shows that perceiving the appearance of an animated persona is independent of believing that there is self-consciousness inside the object. This discussion leads us to the hypothesis that there are three layers that can be applied to any objects, including humans. The first is the layer of biological object. The second is the layer of animated persona. The third is the layer of self-conscious being. For example, my friend sitting in front of me is a biological object and appears as an animated persona to me and is considered to be a self-conscious being. Then what about the no player's case? A no mask is not a biological object. It is made of piece of wood, dead wood, and appears as an animated persona to the audience, but is not considered to be a self-conscious being. So there is a sharp contrast between my friend sitting in front of me and no mask on the stage. An animated persona is not another name of the soul or spirit of a dead person. It is a layer that can be found in a living human being, or a brain-dead human being, or a non-biological mask, or someone's memento. It is true that an animated persona can appear distinctly on the body of a human being who is in the process of dying or who has just died. The reason is, I believe, as follows. When that human being is alive, although I am perceiving the animated persona of that living human being, the power of linguistic communications with her is overwhelming my perception of her animated persona. However, when she enters the process of dying or has just died, our mutual linguistic communications disappears, and the appearance of her animated persona suddenly becomes to loom large. Using a well-known analogy, there are both the sun and the stars in the sky in the daytime. But because the shining of the sun is stronger, so we cannot notice the tiny light of the stars in the daytime. However, when the sun sets, the sunshine disappears from the sky, and we can, for the first time, notice the tiny light of the stars, which have long been out there in the sky in the daytime. The appearance of an animated persona is this tiny light of the stars. It has been there, but we cannot notice its existence. It is when a human being enters the process of dying or has just died that I can, for the first time, notice the appearance of an animated persona, the tiny voice without sound, I am here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much for that absolutely fascinating talk. We're going to take questions. There is a microphone going around the floor, so just wait till the microphone comes to you. Okay, yeah, up there in the green, blue shirt. Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you for the presentation. I have two questions. The first one is that according to your presentation, communication does not presuppose the existence of other. So when you see someone smile to you, she may not exist at all. Is there a danger of solipsism? The second question is Watsuji's idea of animated persona a kind of Confucian idea? Because in Analyst, Confucius argued that in sacrifice to the ancestor, you must suppose that they exist. But if we take this metaphysical assumption, we are assuming the existence of the dead. We assume that they present in the Matsuri, in the sacrifice. So it may be against Watsuji's idea because he tried to avoid the metaphysical presupposition. So what is your opinion?
Thank you very much for your questions. As for the second one, so your question is my interpretation of animated persona in Watsuji have some relationship with Confucian ideas.
Yes, I mean, is his idea similar or different from Confucius' idea in Animus?
Okay, I'm not so. I do not know much about Confucius' idea, but I think this is my intuition. But I think there are strong relationship with Watsuji and Confucius ideas. Yes, but I think it depends on how Confucianism think about the advent or appearance of the soul or coming back the soul. Anyway, I think there are some strong relationships between them, but I do not know exactly what is that. And as for your first questions about the solipsism, yes, it is very interesting because I'm now writing a philosophical paper on solipsism now, and I currently I do not think the solipsism is not so bad. In a common sense, solipsism is considered to be a very bad idea, philosophical ideas, but I think there should be some truth in the idea or philosophy of solipsism, because everyone knows that there is only, in this universe, there is only one person which exists in a very strange and unique way. So I think this is true, but and I think this aspect of the first person existence should not be dismissed. But of course, there is a danger aspect of solipsism, which is that when I think that there is only one self-conscious being in this universe, then if I think like this, I think this is wrong. So I think I'd like to again say that the idea of solipsism is not always so bad concept or so bad philosophical ideas, and I think my theory of animated persona has some positive connections with this positive and solipsism in a positive way, the positive aspect of solipsism. So my answer is that yes, my theory of animated persona has might say yes to a certain aspect of solipsism. This is my answer to your first question.
Okay, a question? Okay, maybe, okay, great, yeah.
Thank you for your very thought-provoking presentation. I was just wondering if you could explain a little bit more about the difference between your view of that animated persona and Levinas, because I was a little confused at the end. You said that, if I understood correctly, the difference was that animated persona is immediately experienced. And then I thought you said that for Levinas, this was not the case. But it's been a while since I read it, but my recollection of Levinas was that when he talks about the encounter with the stranger, that the whole idea of that was that the person is a stranger, so I don't experience, they don't speak to me or anything like that. They don't disclose anything about their inside. It's the immediate encounter with their face. There, this poor person is sitting on the street. We all have that experience. You see the poor person sitting on the street, you come around the corner, immediately you feel either guilt or responsibility or superiority, whatever you feel is immediately there. And I thought that was an important aspect of Levinas's interpretation of the face in terms of the encounter with the stranger.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, if your interpretation of Levinas's concept of face, it's the immediate experience of that strangers, then I think my concept of animated persona is very similar to that Levinas's concept of face, or the encounter with the strangers on the street. So let me read again Levinas's text after this conference. So I'm an amateur on the Levinas philosophy, so let me study again in this. Thank you very much for your useful comment and question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your wonderful talk. I have two questions. One is about what's this persona, mental persona, and so your argument is that persona resides on the surface, But I remember, I think you have mentioned that without the mask, which is not on the face of the no player, has no certain like vitality or like it doesn't have certain spirit. But then when a no player wears the mask and dance, then what she saw, the mask is alive. And then I say that so the movement of the no player made the mask alive. And so I would say surface is important, but also the inside of the object is also important for us to find a person, say, animated persona. Am I clear? So,
Yes.
Yeah, so subject is about the subject. Only the surface without movement, we don't really find the subject there. But in the case of no play, when no player dance, then we find the subject there. So I think, that can be something to consider from what is this discussion. And my second question is a bit so complicated, but do you distinguish persona and personality? And in Miki's article, 日本的性格とファシズム, Miki did not mention what's his name, but he said, いわゆる間柄における人間はペルソーナであって、未だ真のパーソナリティ、人格とは言い難い。So, Miki criticized what she's, it's obvious that he criticized what she's. He said, persona, in the sense of social role in Kaidagara, is not the same as the personality of individual. And I think we can understand his argument that we do not find you as just a teacher or professor, but we find you as you, Morioka Sensei, and the only you. So, in your discussion, you equalize what is Mask and Tanabe's argument. Tanabe's argument also, like Uehara Senroku's argument, but some of them so the individual in the sense of personality and what is discussed in a persona, name in the sense of anonymous being. Then do you, what do you think? Do you distinguish these two, or do you think we, in the case of animated persona, there is no distinction between anonymous or just a social existence or a certain individual personality? Sorry, I'm taking a bit too long.
Okay, thank you very much. For the first question, you said, just like you said, in the case of no mask, the wooden mask is animated and become an animated persona by the movement of the no player's body. But I think, that movement is also appeared as a surface. You see, when the audience see the movement of the no player on the stage, what they see is the surface of the movement of the surface of the no player's body. And that's the movement of the surface gives that no mask a life, animated persona. So in that case, in Watsuji's no player's case also, animated persona appears on the surface, and also animated persona is animated by the surface movement of the no player's body. So in this case, there is no need to imagine something lurk inside the no player's body. This is my view and my reaction to your first question. And for your second question, I do not know I could clearly understand the point of your question, but anyway, I do not think in Watsuji's case, in Watsuji's theory, so he talks about aidagara and in-betweenness, and the human ningen, jinkan, the betweenness of human being and another human being. But I do not think the animated persona is equal to his idea of aidagara, because when Watsuji talks about aidagara, he thinks that there is 2 or 3 self-conscious persons, and there is an in-betweenness among them. So in his discussion of aidagara, probably he imagines that human person which has self-consciousness inside that body. But I think his discussion of animated persona in his essay Mento Persona, he discusses a completely different topic. So, this is my intuition that his discussion in his Mento Persona is very, very different in essence from his theoretical discussion on aidagara in his 人間の学としての倫理学 or 倫理学 So I'm not so on this point I object to your understanding of Watsuji, but you are a specialist in Watsuji, so probably maybe I'm wrong, and also you asked me a question about the difference between personality and person, concept of person, and I think these 2 concepts are very different, and yes, very, very different. And when Miki criticized Watsuji, he criticized Watsuji's concept of so Watsuji's concept doesn't reach the concept of personality. I don't know. So anyway, animated persona, which I found in Watsuji's Mento Persona, is very unique and probably separated from his main argument. So I'm sorry, but this is my comment to your second question, and please let me. So anyway, let us continue discussing.
Thank you very, very much for this very clear presentation. I really like the way that you do philosophy. I would call it doing philosophy on a ground level. You make it very accessible to people, and I think that in a deep sense you are animating philosophy. So I'd like to express 2 problems I have in understanding what you're saying this morning. I hear 2 parts to your presentation. First is an explanation of how it is possible that someone alive experience communication from someone who is dead. And the second part is explaining how each of us apperceives other persons, other people. So in the first explanation, I'm still having some difficulty fitting Watsuji's mask analogy into the experience of dead people communicating. And here's why. When the no mask is not yet animated, not yet alive, it is a piece of wood with nothing else behind it. And then the no actor puts it on. And so now what is behind the no mask is a living person, someone with a will, with practice, with rationality, who can enliven, make that no mask come alive, make the character come alive. And in that case, we are no longer perceiving an animated no mask, but an animated character, the figure, the player, the figure in the no play. In the case of the dead person, however, behind the animated persona of the deceased is a person who was once alive, unlike the no mask that was not alive. And so I'm having some difficulty seeing how the analogy works, how the animated animated persona works both in the case of the no mask and of the perception of the deceased communicating to the bereaved one. And then secondly, in the explanation of how we apperceive other persons, if we use the language of an animated persona as something appearing on the surface of the other, even if this surface has depth, still it sounds like there is something behind, something within that appears outwardly on a surface. So there's something hidden and then it appears on the surface. And on the other hand, you want to say that you are arguing against the view that there is an interior mind in other people, and that supposedly is what one comes to perceive. Now, many philosophers would explain the apperception of others as of recognizing another. When I see you, I see that you are another me. Not in an egoistic sense, but in the sense that I see you as another being who has emotions, imagination, thoughts, not just inside of you, but who also appears in the world, just as I do. So that these philosophers would say, I'm not experiencing you at all as an animated person appearing on the surface of something, but rather experiencing you in the way that I experience myself.
Thank you very much for your questions. And as for your first question, I sometimes think that if a well-produced robot where no mask can dance on the stage, it may feel that in the audience think that there is and they make them feel that there is a animated persona on the face of the mask which was on the face of the robot. So if this is true, there is no so if that robot does not have self-consciousness, then so then what is how do you think, if that no play in the future, the no play will be able to be performed by a well-produced robot? So in this case, some audience see animated persona on the mask, but there is no self-consciousness in the robot player. Well, what do you think about this?
So this is the famous problem of the zombie, as it's discussed in philosophies of self-consciousness.
Yes.
And so, of course, I recognize that it is a problem, but it is a problem for, I believe it is a problem for your explanation based on animated persona, as well as philosophies of self-consciousness. Now, why is it that we would perceive what turns out to be a robot as a self-conscious being? Because we have a lot of experience with self-conscious beings who interact with us and communicate with us. And it's through that first primary experience of people in the world that we first might make the mistake of taking a zombie or a robot as another person. But it would be a similar problem in the explanation you're proposing as in some philosophies of self-consciousness.
Okay, so then I imagine another case. In this, let us imagine a pregnant woman, and who feels or thinks, actually feel that animated persona of her fetus in her belly, in her inside her body, and she actually hear the voice without sound. I am here in her belly, in her body. But in this case, if this fetus is a very earlier stage, there is no, that fetus probably does not have self-consciousness or rationality. So, but that woman actually hear sound, voice without sound. If if we can say that, this case, rational case, it is okay to use the concept of animated persona in this case. There is no consciousness in the fetus, but again, that woman can hear the voice with a sound. I am here, and she can perceive the.
Yes, good. This is a very interesting case. So I'll try to keep this short so other people can speak.
Okay.
So I've presented two problems, but of course we can't just present problems. We have to come up with an alternative explanation. I was thinking about this, and I think what you're also presenting, at least by implication, is a new theory of imagination or imaginative perception on the part of the living being. In this case, it would be the pregnant woman who experiences her unborn child, even at a very early age, maybe just as communicating as saying, I am here. So this is a kind of perhaps an imaginative projection which shows that imagination isn't just something stuck in one's head and thoughts swirling around in the head, but imagination or even imaginative perception has a certain intentionality which reaches outward, which reaches other people in the world, and can reach the deceased loved one that is dead lying on the table. And can apperceive the I am here. And the I am here, of course, in what you're saying, is the unvoiced voice of the other. The I is the other. So that's the way that I would begin an alternative explanation in that case. Well, that's it.
Okay. Thank you. I understand your interpretation, but still, I do not want to use the word projection here in this case, because in her imagination, animated persona appears itself, by itself. So I do not think it's a projection of from my side. Okay. I forget the second question, but anyway, I have to move to that.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I'd like to know how would you deal with an hypothetical situation? Although I read Victor Anderson's book many years ago, I don't remember if he met again his wife or she was dead. I guess she was dead, given the terrible circumstances in which they were. But imagine a single case in which the husband finally meets again his wife. And he says, "Oh, how glad I am to see you alive, and both me and there's some happiness, although there have been terrible circumstances." And then, after a while, the husband asks her wife, "Oh, do you remember that conversation we had a few months ago, in which I was asking you and you were answering me?" And there are, of course, two possibilities. The first one is that she remembers, and then there has been an interpersonal communication. "Oh, of course I remember. You asked me that and I answered that." Okay. Do not suppose she says, "No, we never had such conversation." So in this case, where is the animated person? Is it possible that she, without knowing, was an animated person for his husband, or simply it was an imagination of his husband without any intervention of his wife?
Thank you very much for your very interesting question. I think when she says, "Oh, I didn't," she said she didn't remember having a conversation with him. In that case, still, the husband did have a conversation with his wife's animated persona in his imagination. Yes, so I think there existed the real conversation between husband and the animated persona of his wife. But this conversation occurred in his husband's imagination. But in hearing my reply, probably many of you think that, oh, that is a kind of, so it's so that occurs in the imagination or in the dream, like experience. So this is not a real thing, but very unreal experiences. But I do not think so. For sometime, okay. Sometimes I feel in my when I fall into dream, sometimes I feel someone coming to me, and I really feel someone who I know really come to me and touch me. And after I wake up, I remember that feeling, very vivid feeling. And rationally speaking, it is of course it is considered to be an illusion. But at the same time, I feel, that the fact that the experience I felt when I when I went to sleep, I felt someone's coming to me and touched me, my body, and have a kind of conversation with me. This is a real experience, and I think this should be considered as a real encounter between I and animated persona, which came to me. So I do not know. This may be a correct answer to your question, but this is my comment.
Okay, just one more question. Okay, Virginia.
So thank you. This has given me a lot to think about. In your paper, and then just a couple of minutes ago, you insisted that this animated persona is not a projection. And the assumption was that what you're talking about is something healthy. And projections are somehow hallucinatory, they're distorted. But the fact is, your entire explanation and every example you gave is precisely what we define as projection. Now, when about 100 years ago, the theories circulating about where the spirit world and the world of the gods and religion came from all used precisely the exact examples you give. Projecting through imagination, projecting on the world of nature, projecting on the face of the dead. All these examples were very much circulating. So why not say that it is a projection, but projections are not always illusion, they're not always a malfunction of the psyche, they're not always a distortion of the world, but they can reveal a level of connections with reality that is not publicly, objectively accessible to everyone else. When William James was faced with all of these theories circulating about the gods and the spirit world as mere projection, his answer was that religious experience requires a certain neurosis. You have to be neurotic to have the experiences. And the reason he said that was that we have to be watchful for self-deception. And that's why I'm insisting that you return to projection, or I would like to, because the possibility of self-deception and of psychological self-harm by this animated perception is always possible. So it's important, and we haven't done it for a long time, and your paper suggests that maybe we should go back and review the history of projections and make a little more clear distinction between those that are really essentially, importantly human, to find these connections with reality, and those that are really just distortions and damaging and unhealthy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I haven't thought about that. Yes, I should review the concept of projection from the historical point of view, and I have to read related literature. And so thank you very much, and please teach me about your. I'm not sure. I do not know much about the discussion on the philosophy of religion in Japanese context and also in European context. So please continue discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all we've time for. Thank you so much for that.